Welcome back, everyone. So, we will continue with gathering data remotely. For example, it may be appropriate to engage participants from different countries, from different age groups, or with different abilities. Conducting remote sessions is growing in popularity, although some situations may require a change of approach, for example, from direct observation to indirect observation, where participants' activity is video recorded and analyzed later rather than being observed synchronously by collocated researchers. During the COVID 19 pandemic, many studies needed to pivot toward remote data gathering, and this experience has resulted in a number of outcomes. For example, researchers have realized that remote data gathering is possible even though it may require some creative thinking. Angela in 2021 discussed their experiences of conducting participatory design workshops, simulation sessions, usability evaluation, and interview and design walkthroughs remotely in the emergency medical field. Based on this experience, they suggest some best practices for remote user-centered design activities. So this is mostly for indirect observation. They have created this heuristics or guides that will help you for doing data gathering remotely. Rapid transitioning to remote UCD activities. First, establish remote access for as many systems as possible. Second, include remote access in IRB protocols. Third, run pilot tests before conducting sessions with participants. Fourth, have backup plans in case of technological issues. Interacting with participants. Inform participants ahead of time about any technical requirements. Use technologies that will be familiar and common to participants. 7. Use retrospective questioning if facing issues with Think Aloud method. 8. Gather information about the field site before running sessions. Interacting with other researchers. Define the roles for each researcher member before the session. Introduce the research team members and their various roles at the beginning of the session. So the introduction or the main point is one thing, but another useful to do in remote sessions or in any data gathering is to introduce the role of the research team members. Activity, as this small shop, there won't be many stakeholders. Some period of observation would be important to understand the context of the new and the old system. Interviewing the shop's main stakeholders, i.e., the staff and customers, to identify the positive and negative features of the existing system will yield richer data than questionnaires. Interviewing all the stops is likely to be appropriate because there aren't very many of them. Organic produce is regulated by a variety of laws, so studying this documentation will help identify any legal constraints that have to be accounted for. So here, it uses the right data gathering tool for the specific research. It uses interviewing instead of questionnaires because it's a small group. And then the stakeholders is a small group as well, so it involves all the stakeholder to provide triangulation, and also it uses documents for this specific research. It's kind of like indirect observation for the current laws and legal constraints. In this case, the group of stakeholders is quite large and spread out geographically, so contacting all of them would not be feasible. However, interviewing a representative sample of them, possibly through an online forum or at a local diabetic clinic, is feasible. Observing current practices to monitor blood sugar levels will help to understand what is required but may be too intrusive. Stakeholders who have used other products on the market can be questions about their experience with this existing device to identify improvements for the new device. A questionnaire sent to the wider group or a focus group could be used to check the findings from the interviews. Here, we use questionnaire as well as interview for a small sample poll because unlike the small group, it is a larger group. So observing current practices to monitor blood sugar levels also is part of data gathering techniques. So a stakeholder who have used other products on the market can be questioned about their experiences using interview with this existing devices. So those are the combination of techniques you could use. The group of young people is quite large and spread out geographically. In fact, it is not very well defined. Interviews combined with questionnaires and focus groups would be appropriate. In this case, identifying similar or competing channels and evaluating them will help provide information for an improved product. The aim of this in-depth activity is to practice data gathering. Assume that you have been employed to improve the experience of using an interactive product such as smartphone app, a digital media player, a Blu-ray player, a fitness device, or some other type of technology. This existing product may be redesigned or a completely new product may be created. To do the assignment, find a group of people or a single individual who might use the new or enhanced product. This could be your family, friends, peers, or people in a local community group. Here are the techniques. Clarify the basic goal of improving the product by considering what this means in your circumstances. Watch the group or person casually to get understanding of any issues that might create challenges for this activity and any information to help refine the study goals. Explain how you would use each of the 3 data gathering techniques, interview, questionnaires, and observation in your data gathering program. Explain how your plan takes account of triangulation. Consider your relationship with the participant and decide how to ensure informed consent. Plan your data gathering program in detail. Decide what kind of interview to run and design set of interview questions. Decide how to capture the data, then acquire and test any equipment needed and run a pilot study. Decide whether to include the questionnaires in your data gathering program and design appropriate questions for it. Run a pilot study to check the questionnaire. Decide whether to use direct or indirect observation and where observers will be on the outsider or insider spectrum. Decide how to capture the data, then acquire and test any equipment needed and run a pilot study. Carry out the study but limit its scope. For example, interview only 2 or 3 people or plan 2 half-hour observation periods. Reflect on this experience and suggest what you would do differently next time. Keep the data gathered as this will form the basis of the in-depth activity in Chapter 9. Summary, this chapter has introduced 6 key issues of data gathering that focus on goals, identifying participants' relationship with participants, data storage considerations, triangulation, and pilot study. It has described the planning and execution of 3 main data gathering techniques that are commonly used in interaction design: interviews, questionnaires, and observation. In addition, capturing the data gathered was discussed. Key points: all data gathering sessions should have clear goals. Depending on the study context, an informed consent form and other permissions may be needed to run the study. Capturing and storing participant data needs to be planned and managed to maintain confidentiality. Running a pilot study tests the feasibility of a planned data gathering session and associated instruments such as questions. Triangulation involves investigating a phenomenon from a different perspectives. Data may be recorded using handwritten notes, audio or video recording, photographs, or combination of this. There are 3 styles of interviews: structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. Questionnaires may be online, sent by email, or paper-based. Questionnaires for an interview or questionnaire can be open or close-ended. Close-ended questions require the interview to select from a limited range of options. Open-ended questions accept a free-range response. Observation may be direct or indirect. Indirect observation, the observer may adopt different levels of participation, ranging from insider, participant observer, to outsider, passive observer. Choosing appropriate data gathering techniques depend on the focus of the study, participants involved, nature of the technique, and resource available. Remote data gathering facilitates access to a wider set of participants, and standard approaches can be adopted for a range of remote situations. Data gathering techniques are commonly combined for any one project and may need to be adapted for participants and their contexts. Next, data analysis, interpretation, and presentation. So this is also the video that was corrupted. So we need to repeat it. So introduction, broadly speaking, a qualitative analysis approach, a quantitative analysis approach, or a combination of qualitative and quantitative approach may be taken. The last of this is very common as it provides a more comprehensive account of the data. Most analysis, whether it is quantitative or qualitative, begins with the initial reactions or observations from the data. This may involve identifying patterns or calculating simple numerical values such as ratios, averages, or percentages. So this, before we analyze the data of quantitative and qualitative or combination of both, it start first with the observation of how data is currently is by identifying the pattern or calculating simple numerical values such as ratios, averages, percentage, medians. So the basic facts about the data. For all data, but especially when dealing with large volumes of data, that is big data, it is useful to look over the data to check for any anomalies that might be erroneous, such as people who are 999 years old. This process is known as data cleansing, and there are often digital tools to help with this process. The initial analysis is followed by more detailed work using structured frameworks or theories to frame investigation. Interpretation of the findings often proceed in parallel with analysis, but there are different ways to interpret results, and it is important to make sure that the data supports any conclusions. Imagine that an initial analysis of some customer care questionnaires has revealed a pattern of responses indicating that requires inquiries from customers routed through the Sydney office of an organization take longer to process than those routed through the Oslo office. So interpretation of that initial analysis often proceed with parallel analysis, but there are different ways to interpret results, and it is important to make sure that the data supports any conclusion. So with the data that you collected, make sure that you have an objective conclusion, because otherwise you may lead to erroneous or costly mistake. This result can be interpreted in many different ways. For example, the customer care operatives in Sydney are less efficient. They provide more detailed responses. The technology supporting the inquiry process in Sydney needs to be updated. Customers reaching the Sydney office demand a high level of service, and so on. Which one is correct? To determine whether any of this potential interpretation is accurate, further data such as customer inquiry details and maybe staff interview is needed. A common mistake is for the investigators' existing beliefs or biases to influence the interpretation of results. So there's a lot of options again in this data that we collected. So it's like in the discovery phase. The common mistake is the bias. So that's the reason why we want triangulation, so that we are not caught up with our biases. Biases are formed because of the tendency of the brain to rapidly categorize new information and data, connecting them with past experiences. It is natural to look for patterns and associations in the world as to be prepared to act and behave accordingly, and this can lead to biases. So, for example, you may think that the truth is the for example, CoffeeZilla, which I subscribe, I think a lot of my truths came from him, but that does not mean that it will be true for all people. It's just that me resonate with him. So for some people, truths are different for them because their brain and body and mind and soul are functioning differently. You may think this is truth based on your experience, and that is true. The truth in them is different, and that's okay. That's how like the world works. So, but you need to like achieve more triangulation in your project as much as you can. So, bias, there's always bias, so that's what we call politics. But uh, it's important that this tool, that's the reason why we use this tool, is to reduce those as much as possible. Which one is correct to determine whether any of this potential interpretation is accurate? Further data such as customer inquiry details and maybe staff interviews is needed. Some biases are conscious, preferring to work with women rather than with men, while others are unconscious. Biases influence how people interact with each other, how decisions are made, how people react to the design of an app or product, and how data is collected, analyzed, or interpreted. For example, familiarity bias is when a decision maker sticks to what they know best, and self-attribution bias is when successes are attributed by a people to themselves and not to outside factors. Chapter 8, Data Gathering, discussed the importance of designing neutral questions for data collections, as biases can be introduced in the way questions are phrased. But bias can also influence the analysis and interpretation of data. A key cognitive bias to be aware of in the context of interaction design is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias leads people to discard information that contradicts their existing beliefs, even when there is evidence to the contrary. Jennifer in 2022 from Nielsen points out that confirmation bias is a form of priming in which someone's prior beliefs influence how they react to new information that can distort their interpretation. Quantitative and qualitative examples are the number of years experience the interviewees have, the number of projects a department handles at a time, or the number of minutes it takes to perform a task. Qualitative data is the form of words and images, and it includes descriptions, quotes from interviews, vignettes of activity and photos. It is possible to express qualitative data in numerical form, but it is not always meaningful to do so. So just like in interface, we different interface is applicable to different things. So a rating scale such as 1 to 10 is applicable to up to a point only, and it's not applicable in some cases. It is sometimes assumed that certain forms of data gathering can only result in quantitative data and that others can only result in qualitative data. However, this is a fallacy. All forms of data gathering discussed in the previous chapter may produce qualitative and quantitative data. For example, on a questionnaire, the participants' age, number of software apps they use in a day is quantitative data, while any comments are qualitative data. One way of turning this data into a numerical form would be to count the number of words uttered by each interviewee. Conclusion might then be drawn about how strongly the sales representatives feed about the app. For example, the more they had to say about the product, the stronger they felt about it. But do you think this is a good way to analyze the data? Does it help to answer the study questions? Our first steps in analyzing data. Having collected the data, some initial processing is normally required before data analysis can begin to earnest. For example, audio data may be transcribed by hand or using an automated tool. Quantitative data, such as time taken or errors made, may be entered into a spreadsheet like Excel. Table 9.1 summarizes initial analysis steps for data typically collected through interviews, questionnaires, and observation. Interviews, raw data, audio recording, interview notes, video recording. Example, qualitative data, responses to open-ended questions, video pictures, Respondents' opinions. Example, quantitative data, age, number of mobile devices. Owned, years of experience, responses to close-ended questions. Initial processing steps, transcription of recordings, expansions of notes, entry of answers to close-ended questions into a spreadsheet. Questionnaires, participant of responses, online database. Responses to open-ended questions, responses in further comments, fields, respondent opinions. Example, quantitative data, age, hours, a week spent online, years of experience, respondent responses to close-ended questions, clean up data, filter into different datasets. Observation, raw data, observers note, photographs, audio and video recordings, data logs, think aloud diaries, records of behavior, description of a task as it is undertaken, copies of documents outlining procedures. Example, qualitative data, demographics of participants, time spent on a task, the number of people involved in an activity, how many different types of activity are undertaken. Initial processing step, expansion of notes, transcription of recordings, synchronization between data and recordings. Interviews. Interviewer notes need to be reviewed and clarified and expanded as soon as possible after the interview and before the interviewer starts to forget details. An audio or video recording may be used to help in this process, or a transcription may be used for more detailed analysis. Interviews may be transcribed automatically, but if the tool is not trained to recognize interviewer's accent, this may cause difficulties and manual transcription may be needed. In this case, it is worth considering whether to transcribe the whole interview or just parts of it that are relevant. Deciding what is relevant, however, can be difficult. Revisiting the goals of the study to see which sections address the research question can guide this process. Questionnaires. Increasingly, questionnaires are responses are provided using online surveys, and the data is automatically stored in a database. This data can be filtered according to respondent subpopulation, for instance, everyone under 16, or according to a particular question. For example, to understand respondents' reaction to one kind of robot personality rather than another. These allow analysis to be conducted on subsets of data and hence to draw specific conclusions for more targeted goals. So it allows to categorize or conducted on a set or section of data, then draw a conclusion for more targeted goals. So this is what this questionnaires does. And it also can also be divided into sections, the participants and the questions it can ask to them. Conducting this kind of analysis requires sufficient data from a large enough sample of participants. So this questionnaires, this one of this property is it is often required to go wide with people because you can do that. You can easily scale it. And then for interview, one of its properties is reflecting after the interview to make sure the details is not forgotten. Just like in learning, you need to explain it or reiterate it after you have learned it so that you can better understand what's happening. Observation can result in a wide variety of data, including notes, photographs, data logs, think aloud recordings, often called protocols, video and audio recordings. Taken together, these different types of data provide a rich picture of the observed activity. The difficult part is working out how to combine different sources to create a coherent narratives. Analytic frameworks discussed in 9.5 can help with this. Initial data processing includes reviewing and expanding notes and transcribing elements of any recordings, and think aloud protocols for observation in a controlled environments. Initial processing might include synchronizing different data recordings. So for controlled environment, the initial processing synchronizing different data recordings, and this observation can result in a wide variety of data or structured of data such as photographs, just like what we've discussed in the previous chapter, in which the data for this direct observation as ethnography is more wide because you're trying to create um, new information. You're allowing new information to emerge, just like in inductive, which we will discuss later. So this actually data provides us a clearer or more picture for what is actually happening in the complex world. Transcriptions and observers' notes are most likely to be analyzed using qualitative approaches, while photographs provide contextual information. So transcriptions or and the observer notes is used for qualitative approach, while the photographs is for context. So a photographs is good for context to kind of like provide the introduction of what the main point. Data logs and some elements of the observer's note would probably analyze quantitatively. For data logs and the questioner's answers, it is useful to do it quantitatively because you're dealing with the large data. Basic quantitative analysis. Here, we introduce the two basic quantitative analysis techniques that can be used effectively in interaction design: averages and percentages. Percentages are useful for standardizing the data, particularly to compare two or more large sets of responses. Averages are fairly well-known numerical measures of central tendency. However, there are three different types of average, and using right one can help communicate results more effectively. These are these three are mean, median, and mode. So median, this is what we really mean by average because it removes the unusual data such as 999. So it provides a more average number in a set of data. Mean refers to the commonly understood interpretation of average, that is, add together all the figures and divide by the number of figures with which you started. Basic qualitative analysis. Central to qualitative analysis is the identification of concepts referred to as codes in the data, and this process is often referred to as coding. Two common ways in which coding proceeds are in an inductive, both bottom-up fashion, or a deductive, top-down fashion. So for qualitative analysis of data, there's a coding. For inductive, you're trying to go wide because you're allowing new information to emerge, while in deductive, you're going top-down because you're trying to categorize the information. So kind of like in algorithm, right? There's a top-down and bottom-up approach, and those are used for different cases. In the former case, codes arise from the data, and the latter, a predefined set of codes, is identified from a relevant query, and data is interpreted using that set. So, in the inductive, the codes or the main point or the category arise from the data itself. And in the latter, a predetermined set of codes or category is identified from a relevant query, and the data is interpreted using that set. So this is the inductive that we were talking about earlier. In practice, analysis is often performed iteratively, and it is common for codes identified inductively initially to then be defined and applied deductively to new data. So we perform an iteration for this, just like in the design. So it's common to initially do inductive and then do deductive. So that's the most common. And for an initial pre-existing set of codes to be enhanced, inductively when applied to a new situation or new data. And then if you have a pre-existing set of codes or category or deductive already, you can enhance it by doing inductive. So it's like interrelated. For you to provide more category, you do the inductive to discover new information. So it's kind of like zooming in and zooming out. One of the most challenging aspects of qualitative analysis is determining meaningful codes that do not overlap, that is, codes that can be clearly defined and consistently distinguished. So it like discovery, so you get a data like a pattern that is consistent, that is not contradicting each other. Another is deciding on the appropriate granularity for them. For example, at the word, phrase, sentence, or paragraph level. So remember the conversation analysis, where really that's the challenge, is because for large data, you don't know if you will analyze it by word, sentence, or paragraph, kind of like in Mortimer Adler book, in which the word combination of word that forms a sentence provides a magic. So where do you get the balance, right? Because you need to zoom in and out. So those are the two most common challenge. Whether an inductive or deductive approach is used, the code definitions and their interpretations are captured in a coding scheme that help researchers interpret the data consistently and reliably. Anne and Nicholas in 2022 describe a coding scheme as a collection of concepts and their lower dimension that become codes and explicit rules for how to use them. So a coding scheme could be defined based on Anna and Nicholas as a collection of concepts and their lower dimensions that can become codes and explicit rules for how to use them. So their lower dimension could be another codes, and it could be used as a rules or category to on how to use them. So it's like a category inside category, if you like understand what I mean. So basically that's just a like in a salient information, you need to categorize and categorize for you to have more organized and explicit rules on how to use them. So the more organized, the more you have this category, and the more you get the balance on when to stop categorizing and going inductively. So this is at the heart of this qualitative analysis. To quantify the coding scheme's reliability, an interreliability score may be calculated. So these are the percentage of agreement between the analysis of two researchers, defined as the number of items consistently coded expressed as percentage of the total number of items coded. So based on the information or code in inductive and deductive process, how many researchers agree with what percentage to where that code implies. An alternative measure of interreliability where two researchers have done coding is Cohen's kappa, which considers the possibility that agreement has occurred due to chance. If there's a large discrepancy between the two analyses, the coding scheme needs further refinement. The first step in qualitative analysis is to gain an overall impression of the data and to start looking for interesting features, topics, repeated observations, or things that stand out. Some initial impression and possible pattern to look for may have emerged during data gathering. For example, log data of people visiting TripAdvisor.com may suggest that they often look for hotels that are rated terrible first. During the first pass, it is important to highlight common features and record any surprises rather than attempt to capture all the findings. Plan for in 2017. For observations, the guiding framework used in data gathering will give some structure to the data. For example, the practitioner's framework for observation introduced in Chapter 8 will have resulted in a focus on who, where, and what, while using the more detailed framework, will result in patterns relating to physical objects, people's goals, sequence of events, and so on. So the first step in this qualitative is to gain the introductory or the main point or impression of the data, to start looking for interesting features such as topics and repeated observation or pattern or things that stand out, such as critical incident. Some initial impressions and possible patterns to look for may have emerged during data gathering. For example, log data of people visiting traveladvisor.com may suggest that they often look for hotels that are rated terrible first. So for data gathering, the you may find the qualitative data while you're gathering that the data already. So analyzing that may be the first step or the introductory. During this first pass, it is important to highlight common features and patterns and record any surprises rather than attempt to capture all findings. So instead of analyzing all the data, what you want is to take note of that interesting feature of the or the main point or the unusual things. For observation guiding the framework used in data gathering will give some structure to the data. So the structure that we ask during the observation, which we discussed in the previous video, will help us to guide what is the initial point. So for example, the practitioner's framework for observation introduced in chapter 8 will have result in asking who, where, and what, while using the more detailed framework will result in patterns relating to physical objects, people's goals, sequences of events, and so on. Remember how we use a heuristics or this who, where, what, and a more detailed one for expert that needs to get a hold of the observation for ethnography study or observation way of gathering data. So this is your starting point of analyzing qualitative data. How to decide which is an interesting event will depend on what is being observed. For example, what in a study of the interruptions that occur in an open plan office, an event may be each time that a person takes a break from an ongoing activity. For instance, when a phone rings, someone walks into their cubicle or email arrives. If it is a study of how pairs of students use an online collaborative learning tool, then activities such as turn taking, speaking over one another, and any exchange in the chat, and periods when one or other is distracted would be appropriate to record. They also emphasize the importance of considering alternative interpretations and provide some useful practical tips on video analysis, including how to construct clear and transparent concepts that enable reflection and critique, how to construct and apply a coding scheme, and how to overcome a range of challenge. For example, they highlight that coding decision can be ambiguous, subjective, or incorrect. So, mostly to decide what is an interesting is depends on what is being observed. So remember, take note, observation is the most useful here for quantitative data, because again we're trying to go wide, and qualitative provide us a more conversational data, which is, as we know, is the more complex because it's a lot of data. And also it depends on different use cases or study goals. So it reiterate the main point. So it also emphasizes the importance of alternative interpretation and provides some useful practical tips on video analysis. So the reason why you want alternative interpretation is to avoid bias and to achieve triangulation, and that enable reflection and critique, how to construct and apply coding scheme, and how to overcome a range of challenges. So in a way, you're failing early. So just like in a code, you won't ask always how to do this. You also ask from time to time, what are the available options that could do, and if what you are currently doing is correct. So you need to like ask this, because sometimes during the flow, for example, of your conversation with AI, with creating that app, the AI might have bias in creating that app instead of thinking that other option that may be applicable. So this is the use of this data analysis, is that you're not just thinking about what you want to do, uh, but you have an ability or skill to zoom out and balance it by asking what are the contradicting information that would challenge your assumptions on the data. For example, they highlight that coding decisions can be ambiguous, subjective, or incorrect. So this, because the coding decision, because you're the only one we're doing it, you are prone to bias because you're just one person experiencing one thing. Identifying themes. More formally, a theme is something important about the data in relation to the study goal. So a theme is that one point in relation to the study. It represents a pattern of some kind, perhaps a particular topic or feature found in the dataset, which is considered to be relevant and even unexpected with respect to the study goal. Themes may relate to a variety of aspects: behavior, a stakeholder group, events, places, or situations where those events happen, and so on. So it could relate to aspects of behavior or a stakeholder groups, event, places, or situation where those events happen, and so on. Kind of like in the heuristics for observation. For example, description of typical users may be one outcome of data analysis that focus on participants' characteristics. So a theme may be focused on participants' characteristic. The use of the term theme varies, and there are some key distinction to be aware of as discussed in box 9.6. So what is theme and why does it matter? Thematic analysis is a widely used term, but thematic analysis are not all the same. And use of the term theme varies. Virginia in 2009 distinguished between themes as patterns of meaning and themes as data summaries. So Virginia distinguished the themes as patterns of meaning and themes as data summaries. So that's the thematic analysis actually are not the same. So basically, a key difference is whether the analysis is seeking to uncover the meaning behind the words, or is it seeking to summarize the diversity of responses across participants, or it's trying to categorize or summarize. So the keyword is summarize or categorize, and then uncover. So it's like inductive or deductive. There isn't a correct application of these ideas in analysis, but it is important that approach used is designed deliberately. In particular, it is important to recognize the distinction between the following: identifying common themes as a kind of data summary versus developing themes that reflect hidden or implicit meaning, developing themes that arise from data versus using a predefined framework to analyze data. In the former case, the key is to interpret the data to make meaning explicit, while in the latter case, the key is how to interpret the predetermined categories in the context of the study. A desire to find the correct coding versus a desire to ensure that codes are clearly defined are interpreted consistently. Measures of interreliability can be used as a guide in either case. In the former case, the key is to interpret the data to make meaning explicit, while in the latter case, the key is how to interpret the predefined categories in the context of the study. After an initial pass through the data, the next step is to look more systematically for themes across data, seeking further evidence both to confirm and disconfirm initial impressions to find further themes that may not have been noticed in the first time. Sometimes, the refined themes resulting from this systematic analysis form the primary set of findings from the analysis, and sometimes they are just starting point. Once a number of themes have been identified, it is usual to step back from the set of themes to look at the bigger picture. Is an overall narrative starting to emerge, or are the themes quite disparate? Do some seem to fit together with others? If so, is there an overarching theme? Can a meta narrative that is an overall picture of the data be formed? In doing this, some of the original themes may not seem as relevant and can be removed. Are there some themes that contradict each other? Why might this be the case? This can be done individually, but more often this is applied in a group using brainstorming techniques. These use inductive coding rather than existing understanding of additional recovery, which allowed them to focus on the content expressed in the Reddit channels. Codes were first identified in the threads, and then themes were developed from the codes and their context. The researchers then discussed themes and supporting quotations and reviews other threads within the Reddit channels to reach agreement with the themes identified. Table 9.5 shows example themes and sub-themes. Through this, they revealed that these Reddit communities use stories to engage in a range of discussion, including relapse, body weight, personal finance, and legal trouble. Theme, sharing experience, sub-themes, self-reflections, paraphrase example quote, reading this snake mind and thinking about my feelings and what alcohol took from me has been enlightening. I was able to establish a critical perspective that showed me how warped my thoughts had subconsciously become. Sub-themes, sharing failures, sharing success. Says, I remember how much I struggled at 4 months and show I couldn't understand why it wasn't getting easier to resist the cravings. Now that I am at 6 months, I'm finally understanding why everyone means that then they say the cravings don't go away, they just change. Thankfully now, despite it being a shitty week, I am not thinking about using as my first thought. Remember, it does get easier, so don't give up. Sub-themes, waking up, still experiencing the occasional vivid dream of taking pills. I guess it's because it was so prominent in my life for so long. What sucks most is that after these themes, the craving is so strong. At least I am starting to feel disappointed in the high, even in the dream. Theme, peer support, sub-themes, check-ins. Day 5, Monday night, really wanted to drink but I resisted. Sub-themes, encouragement, exercise works wonder. Try different activities like yoga and working out. Keep up the good work. So those are the example of theme and sub-themes, etc. Now let's go to affinity diagrams. Affinity diagrams are widely used in interaction design to organize large amounts of data and ideas. Both digital and physical diagramming are popular, with differing opinions about which is preferable. Although they found that digital tools save time, improve manipulation, and help get an overview of the data, they also found that digital tools reduce awareness of co-participant actions and provided fewer clues about ownership of the notes. On the other hand, students' experience of the Miro collaborative Canvas tool described in Chapter 5, social interaction, was very positive and referred to increased awareness. Here, section of an affinity diagram built during design of a web application. Categorizing data. Inductive analysis is appropriate when the study is exploratory if it's important to let the themes emerge from data itself. Sometimes a pre-existing set of categories is chosen as the analysis frame. This is appropriate when an existing theory or previous analysis provide a useful lens of the study. So, if you already have some clue of what you want to study, then categorizing it minimizes the time of doing this. For example, in a study of novice interaction design behavior in Botswana in 2014 and 1983 design and reflection cycle, naming, framing, moving, and reflecting, this allowed the researchers to identify detailed patterns in the design behavior from which they derive implications for education and support. These studies involve observing students working through some online educational material about evaluation methods using the Think Aloud technique. The Think Aloud protocol was recorded and then transcribed before being analyzed from various perspectives, one of which was to identify usability problem that the participants were having with online environment. Figure 9.5 shows an excerpt from the transcription. So I'm thinking, so this is our Think Aloud technique that they have done. So they use this key category, naming, framing, moving, and reflecting. So it allowed them to find detailed patterns based on that. So these are the interface problems. Uh, Verbalizations show evidence of dissatisfaction about an aspect of the interface. Verbalizations show evidence of confusion, uncertainty about an aspect of an interface. Verbalizations show evidence of confusion, surprise, all the outcome of an action. Verbalization show evidence of physical discomfort. It shows evidence of fatigue, show evidence of difficulty in seeing particular aspects of the interface. It show evidence that they are having problems achieving a goal that they have set themselves or the overall task goal. It's also show evidence that the user has made an error. The participant is unable to recover from error without external help from the experimenter. The participant suggests a redesign of the interface of the electronic text. Content problems. Verbalization show evidence of dissatisfaction about aspects of the content of the text. Verbalization show evidence of confusion, uncertainty about aspects of the content of the text. Verbalization show evidence of misunderstanding of the text content. The user may not have noticed this immediately. The participant suggests rewriting the text content. Identified problems should be coded as up. Problem no. Criteria for identifying usability problems from verbal protocol transcription. So those are the criteria for usability problems. So having categorized the data, the results can be used to answer the study goals in the online education example. The researchers were able to quantify the number of usability problems encountered overall by participants, the mean number of problems per participants for each of the text conditions, and the number of unique problems each type per participant. This also helped to identify patterns of behavior and recurring usability problems. Having the Think Aloud protocol means that the overall view of the usability problems could take context into account. Critical incident analysis. Data gathering sessions can often result in a lot of data. Analyzing all of this data in any details is very time consuming and often not necessary. Critical incident analysis is one approach to identify significant subsets of data for more detailed analysis. So I would say that this is the most useful, and with algorithms as well, you're trying to sort it or prioritize first. In fact, in algorithms, the most useful algorithms is sorting, in which you prioritize things. Kind of like in Pareto principle. These techniques emerged from work carried out in the United States Army Forces, where the goal was to identify the critical requirements of good and bad performance by pilots. It has two basic principles. A. Reporting facts regarding behaviors preferable to collection of interpretations, ratings and opinions based on general impressions. B. Reporting should be limited to those behaviors which, according to competent observers, make a significant contributions to the activity. In the interaction design context, the use of well-planned observation sessions satisfies the first principle. The second principle refers to critical incidents, that is, incidents that are significant or pivotal to the activity being observed in either a desirable or undesirable way. In interaction design, critical incident analysis has been used in a variety of ways, but the main focus is to identify specific incidents that are significant and then to focus on these and analyze them in detail, using the rest of the data collected as context to inform interpretation. This may be identified by participants during a retrospective discussion of a recent event or by an observer either through studying video footage in real time. For example, in an evaluation study, a critical incident may be signaled by times when participants were obviously stuck, usually marked by a comment, silence, and looks of pessimism, and so on. In a city of dashboards, Garrett Young in 2020 used a critical incident technique with concurrent think aloud to capture details of critically significant behaviors. Participants were asked to explore 4 city dashboards in Dublin, New York, London, and Hawaii, and the results were used to derive design guidelines for building other city dashboards, including for navigation and visualization. In another study, Thomas in 2017 used the critical incident technique to identify the types of behavior change that playing the locations-based augmented reality game Pokemon Go induce in players. They are distributed in a survey through social media channels, asking experienced players to identify and describe one outstanding positive or negative experience. The 262 valid responses were themed and categorized into 8 groups. Apart from expected behavior change, such as increased physical activity, they also found that players were more social, their routines more meaningful, they expressed more positive emotions, and were more motivated to explore their surroundings. So these are the example excerpt in figure 9.5 coded using categorization scheme in figure 9.6. Activity: assign yourself a friend the task of identifying the next available live music performance that you'd like to attend. As you perform this task or watch your friend do it, make a note of critical incidents associated with the activity. Remember that a critical incident may be a positive or negative event. Comment: information about such performance may be available through a local notice board, searching ticket vendor apps, looking at social media to see what is recommended by friends, or contacting local buyers, theaters, or clubs directly. When this author asked her daughter to attempt this task, several critical incidents emerged, including the following. After checking her social media channels, noting in recommendation appealed to her, so she decided to check the local avenues directly. She found that one of her favorite bands was playing at the local music venue for just 1 week, and tickets were still available. When trying to buy the tickets, she discovered that she needed a credit card, which she didn't have, so she had to ask me to complete the purchase. So, yeah, we're done. Then I think we'll just continue with a little bit with the data gathering. So, there's some unclear audio as well with this section in data gathering. So let's see. I think this is it. So let's try this. Relationship with participants. Having clear and professional relationship and building rapport with participants increases the likelihood a successful study. In many countries, participants must be given sufficient information about the project, the data that will be collected, and how the data is to be used for them to make an informed decision about their participation. This informed consent may be given in written form by signing a document or orally via an audio or video recording. The details of this form will vary, but it is usually asked the participants to confirm that the purpose of data gathering and how the data will be used has been explained to them and that they are willing to continue. It explains that their data will be private and kept in a secure place. It also often includes a statement that participants may withdraw at any time and that in any case, none of the data will be used in the study. Building rapport with participants encourage them to participate in a relaxed manner. Building rapport in a remote setting has particular challenges, especially if the communication medium is limited, like audio only, so the participants can be seen. Some of these challenges relate to missing body language and personal dynamics, and building trust takes longer if the people don't already know each other. How to build rapport and gain acceptance by participants' communities differs across situations. For example, Peter in 2021 described the communication conventions adopted between research teams and the Don Kerbosan community in Nambia for a number of ongoing projects. These include communications before arrival at the community and communications during the visit that include a meeting with local headman, community meetings to greet everyone and share progress related to ongoing projects, and a departure community meeting review the visit. In their paper, they observed that this is important to build trust and also to understand differing socio-cultural norms. So here's an example of informed consent for the recycle project. Please highlight your choice by clicking inside the appropriate box. I have read and understood the information sheet, or it has been read for me, and I have been able to ask questions about my participation, and my questions have been answered to my satisfaction, yes or no. I consent to be a participant in this study and understand that participation is voluntary and that I will not be paid for my participation, yes or no. I understand that I can refuse to answer questions I am not comfortable with and that I may withdraw and discontinue participation and at any time in this study up to 2 months after data collection without giving any reason, yes or no. The name, so there's another question, but let's skip name, print name, and signature and date, and names and contact information for all team members involved in data gathering, so they know it. Ethical considerations for data gathering. Let's see. Lightweight, high quality recording equipment is readily available nowadays, like through a smartphone, so capturing that is very easy. People are used to taking photographs and videos in many social settings, and video conferencing system can automatically take audio and video recordings or even transcriptions. Screenshots may also be captured with the click of a button, and large amounts of data are available through online activities such as tweets and messaging. The regulations covering access to this data will depend on the jurisdiction where the machine is located, and different countries operate different rules regarding data security. For example, the European Union General Data Protection Regulation came into force in May 2018. It applies to all EU organizations, offer the individual unprecedented control over their personal data. Keeping a record on the laptop used for data collection may be convenient, but is that laptop encrypted? What happens if it's left on the train? Projects or organization that collect personal data can identify someone need to demonstrate that is protected from unauthorized access. For example, they need to demonstrate that their data is anonymized. Names of participants and their data are kept separately. Physical records are kept in a locked cupboard, and digital media encrypted. Triangulation. Triangulation is a term used to refer to the investigation of phenomenon from at least two different perspectives. Four types of triangulation have been defined. Triangulation of data means data is drawn from different sources at different times in different places or from different people, possibly by using different sampling technique. Investigator triangulation means that different researchers, observers, interviewers, and so on have been involved in collecting and interpreting data. Triangulation of theories means the use of different theoretical frameworks through which to view the data or findings. Methodological triangulation means to employ different data gathering techniques. The methodological triangulation is the most common form of triangulation to validate the results of some inquiry by pointing to similar results yielded through different perspectives. However, validation through triangulation is difficult to achieve. Different data gathering techniques result in different kinds of data which may or may not be compatible. Using different theoretical frameworks may or may not result in complementary findings, but achieving theoretical triangulation requires the theories to have similar philosophical underpinnings. Using more than one data gathering technique and more than one data analysis approach is good practice because it leads to insight from the different approaches, even though it may not be achieving through triangulation. A different kind of triangulation emphasizes the verification and reliability of data. This is referred to as checking for ground truth. It is commonly used in studies involving large amounts of data such as crowdsourcing and machine learning to check that the data is authentic and reliable. But identifying ground truth is not straightforward. Self-reported or human-labeled data is often regarded as ground truth in some domains, but the accuracy of human labeling is unclear. For example, Nunn in 2021 investigate the reliability of self-reported data for identifying persons' mental state, as this is often used as ground truth when building machine learning prediction models in this domain. Their findings indicate that psychologically measured engagement and perceived engagement are not always consistent. Pilot study. A pilot study is intended to test elements of the main study to identify potential problems in advance so they can be corrected. A pilot study is often a small trial run of the main study with a limited number of participants. For example, the equipment and instruction may be checked. The questions for an interview or in a questionnaire may be tested for clarity, and an experimental procedure may be confirmed. If it's difficult to find participants or access them is limited, asking colleagues or peers to participate may be an alternative for a pilot study. Note that anyone involved in a pilot study cannot be involved in the main study itself. Why? Because they will know more about the study and this can distort results. Data is what you collect. This is then analyzed and interpreted and conclusions drawn. Information is gained from analyzing and interpreting the data, and conclusion represents the actions to be taken based on that information. For example, consider a study to determine whether a new screen layout for a local leisure center has improved the user's experience when booking a swimming lesson. In this case, the data collected may include a set of times to complete the booking, comments regarding the new screen layout, biometric readings of the user's heart rate while booking a lesson, and so on. At this stage, the data is raw and information will emerge when this raw data has been analyzed and the results interpreted. For example, analyzing the data might indicate that people who have been using the leisure center for more than 5 years find the new layout frustrating and take longer to look, while those who have been using it for less than 2 years find the new layout helpful and can book lessons more quickly. So later we will discuss capturing data. I guess, yeah, I think we have recorded that clearly. So again, guys, thank you for watching and see you on the next video. Peace.